My name is Marin Voss. I'm from a small town called Ellsworth, Kansas, which is exactly as flat and unremarkable as it sounds. I grew up in my grandmother's kitchen, which smelled like cinnamon and rendered lard and the particular kind of warmth that only wood stoves can make. She used to say, "Marin, a woman who can feed people can do anything." I didn't know she was right until it was almost too late. I went to culinary school in Chicago, graduated top of my class, spent 4 years doing prep work in a Michelin-starred restaurant where the head chef once threw a pan at my head because I oversalted a bisque by half a teaspoon. I stayed because that's what you do when you love something. You take the hard parts and you learn from them and you don't quit. Then the compact happened. If you weren't alive in 2019 when the Thyssen sovereignty made first contact with Earth, I don't know how to explain what that felt like. You know those moments in history where everything before it is one world and everything after is a completely different world? It was like that, but faster. 3 alien ships the size of downtown Chicago appeared over the Pacific Ocean on a Tuesday morning in March. By Thursday, we had translators. By the following Monday, we had trade agreements. The Thyssen they look like people if you squint. Tall people, extremely pale people with eyes that are slightly too large and slightly too reflective and fingers that have one extra joint. They breathe our air fine. They eat mostly. Their biology overlaps with ours enough that they can process about 60% of Earth's food groups, but a lot of things that are harmless to us are violently toxic to them. Nightshade family plants, most citrus. Anything with capsaicin, so no peppers of any kind. Certain preservatives. Certain artificial colorings. Things that won't kill them usually but will make them very, very sick. Which is why, when the Thyssen sovereignty put out a request through diplomatic channels for a human cook who could adapt Earth cuisine for Thyssen biology, I applied. I applied because I was 31 years old and single and my restaurant had just closed down, and I had nothing to lose. I applied because my grandmother always said I could do anything. I applied because I wanted to see the stars. I got the job. 6 months of diplomatic orientation, biological compatibility testing, Thyssen language coursework. I got functional in their primary dialect, which sounds like someone speaking through a brass instrument, and then a shuttle ride to the third ring station in the orbit of Velkdara Prime, which is the Thyssen sovereignty's second most important administrative and ceremonial hub. And then I met her. Chapter 2, VA Elation. I had been briefed extensively on the princess. Academic briefings, protocol briefings, dietary restriction briefings. I knew that she was the third daughter of Sovereign Maelkar the Elder. I knew she was 23 years old in Thyssen calendar terms, which works out to about 19 in Earth years. I knew she was studying galactic diplomacy and was stationed on Third Ring because the Sovereign wanted her to learn how to operate in a multi-species environment before she took on formal responsibilities. What the briefings did not tell me was that she was funny. The first time I served her, a meal I'd spent 2 days testing and adjusting, a modified beef consommé with carefully sourced Thyssen root vegetables, and a type of salt crystal the Thyssen use in their own cuisine. She looked at the bowl, looked at me, and said, in careful English, "It smells like something my grandmother warned me not to eat." I said, "That's probably the rosemary. I can take it out." She said, "Don't. I want to try things my grandmother warned me about." And she ate the whole bowl. After that, we talked every time I served her. She was curious about Earth in the way that kids are curious about things, not academically, not diplomatically, just genuinely wanting to know. She asked me about weather, about dogs, about why humans put so much effort into making food look decorative when taste is the function. I told her about my grandmother's kitchen. She told me about the Thyssen tradition of communal cooking during what she called the Long Drift festivals, where entire districts would cook together in open plazas, and the smells were supposed to reach the ancestors in whatever afterlife the Thyssen believed in. I'm not going to say she was like a little sister to me. That would be patronizing. She was a young woman who was intelligent and sometimes lonely in the particular way that people with a lot of power are often lonely, and she liked my food, and she talked to me and I liked her. That's enough. That's plenty. I served her for 3 years. And then, on the 40th day of the month of the long drift, someone tried to kill her. Chapter 3. The Kitchen, the morning of Cycle 740. The third ring station is enormous. It's about 40 kilometers in diameter, a rotating habitat ring with full artificial gravity. The inner surface, the floor, is built up like a city. There are districts. There are parks with Thyssen vegetation, blue-gray grass and trees that look like someone crossed a willow with a glass sculpture. There are market squares. There are residential blocks. The royal household occupied a compound at what the Thyssen called the apex of the ring, the administrative top. It was built in classic Thyssen high architecture style, which means lots of curved white surfaces and tall, narrow windows and rooms that feel like being inside a seashell. My kitchen was in the lower service wing, below the main residential floors. Big by station standards. Industrial refrigeration, custom filtration systems to keep contaminating food particles separated, 2 prep stations, 6 burner equivalents. The Thyssen used a heated plate system rather than open flame, but after 3 years I'd learned to work it like a range. I was in at 400 station time, always was. That particular morning I had a breakfast service planned that I'd been working on for a week. The princess had expressed interest in something she'd seen in a cultural exchange file, a traditional English breakfast. Full English, the works. I'd spent days sourcing Earth-compatible versions of everything. The eggs were from a controlled hydroponics lab that kept chickens in the station's ag sector. The bread I'd baked myself the day before, a white sandwich loaf, simple, beautiful. The mushrooms were the hard part. Regular button mushrooms were fine for Thyssen, but I'd had to test 3 varieties before finding one the princess could process without any reaction. The tomatoes were out, nightshade family, absolute no. I substituted a Thyssen root called Velcara that had a similar acidity when roasted. I came in at 400. I started the bread warming and set the eggs to come up to room temperature. I put on the kettle. The princess had developed a genuine enthusiasm for strong tea, black, no sugar, and I started my prep. And then I noticed something wrong with the Velcara. Chapter 4. The Smell. You spend enough time in a kitchen, you develop a relationship with smell. Not just your nose, your whole body starts to calibrate. You walk into a kitchen, and inside 3 seconds you know if something is off. It's not a thought. It's more like a warning light in your chest. The Velcara was wrong. I'd roasted Velcara probably 200 times over 3 years. It smells when it heats, slightly sweet, slightly mineral, like beets that went to university. That morning, heating in the low oven where I'd set it to warm through before service, it smelled different. Not bad, exactly. Not the smell of rotting, not the smell of burning. Something else. Something that I didn't have a word for but that my body filed under wrong. I pulled the tray out. The Velcara looked normal. It had been delivered the previous evening from the station's supply depot, same as always in the standard sealed containers. I checked the seals. They looked intact, but they were the only ingredient on my entire prep line that had been out of my direct possession overnight. Everything else, the bread I'd baked, the eggs I'd collected myself from the ag sector the afternoon before, the butter I'd made from cream earlier in the week, I had made or personally retrieved. The Velcara had been delivered. I stood there in my kitchen at 4:12 station time looking at a tray of root vegetables that smelled about 4% wrong, and I thought, no. I didn't touch it. I put a fresh tray of unroasted Velcara in the oven. I always kept emergency backup stock, and I checked everything else on the prep line, one item at a time, with my hands and my nose and 20 years of training behind me. Everything else was clean, just the delivery batch. I set the delivery batch aside in a sealed container. I finished my prep with the backup stock. I served breakfast. I didn't say anything to anyone because I didn't have proof, and because in a royal household with multiple species and political layers, I had learned very quickly that an accusation without proof is a grenade you throw at yourself. But I kept the Velcara. Chapter 5: The Death-Hounds. I need to tell you about the Death-Hounds before I tell you what happened next, because they're important, and because nobody on Earth talks about them enough. Thyssen royal households keep animals called Velcrath. In English, the translation that stuck, mostly because the first human diplomat who encountered one nearly fainted, is Death-Hounds. The name is both accurate and completely misleading. They look like dogs roughly, big dogs. The size of a mastiff, with a low center of gravity and deep chests and legs that are slightly longer in the back than the front, so they move with this rocking, powerful lope. Their coats are black and charcoal, short and very dense, and their eyes are amber gold and slightly luminescent in low light. They have 6 toes on each foot, each one tipped with a retractable claw that leaves marks on station flooring. What makes them Death-Hounds, and I understand now why the diplomat nearly fainted, is their biological function in Thyssen society. They are not guard animals in the way that Earth dogs are guard animals. They don't bark. They don't bite as a first response. They are poison detectors. The Thyssen developed them over centuries of court politics that apparently involved significant amounts of assassination by poisoning. The Velcrath can detect toxins in the air at concentrations that would make our most sensitive laboratory equipment look like a child's chemistry set. They smell poison the way I smell garlic, clearly, immediately, specifically. And when they detect it, they do not bark or snarl. They sit down directly in front of the source of the toxin, and they look at the nearest member of the royal family, and they hold perfectly still. Completely still. Not aggressive, not frightened, just fixed, like a compass needle pointing north. It is, honestly, one of the most unsettling things I have ever seen. The royal household had 3 of them. Their names in the Thyssen court records were designations 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Velcrath of the Thyssen sovereignty 3rd ring household. The handlers called them different things. The princess called them names she'd invented, in a mix of Thyssen and English, which was very much her personality. The largest one, a male with a white star mark on his left shoulder, she called Brand. The middle one, female, always the most alert, always watching doorways, the princess called Vale. The youngest, still technically in training but operational, a compact and serious animal who shadowed the princess through the compound as though it was his job and his joy combined, she called Moth. I had a relationship with all 3 of them, because animals like people who feed them, and I occasionally, with the handler's permission, gave them portions of whatever I was testing, safe portions, nothing that would harm them. Brand was dignified and accepted food calmly. Vale assessed everything twice before eating. Moth ate like he was afraid someone was going to take it away. On the morning of cycle 740, about 40 minutes after I'd served the princess her breakfast and she'd gone off to her morning studies, Moth followed me back to the kitchen. He wasn't supposed to be in the kitchen. The protocols were clear. The animals stayed in the residential wing and the garden corridor, not in the service areas. But 3rd Ring Station was a working compound, and the doors between residential and service weren't sealed, just conventionally respected. Moth had clearly decided that conventions did not apply to him that morning. I didn't shoo him out. I was used to him. I set him a small bowl of the testing scraps I kept for the handlers and went back to my work. He did not eat. He sat down next to the sealed container, holding the delivery batch of Velcara. And he looked at me. Chapter 6: What Moth Knew. I stood in the middle of my kitchen for a moment, watching Moth sit next to that sealed container, with the focused, absolute stillness that I now knew was not something he did casually. My heart started doing something that wasn't quite panic. closer to the feeling you get when something falls off a shelf and you catch it before it hits the floor, that spike of adrenaline that arrives after the crisis, not before. I said very quietly, "Yeah, I thought so." Moth didn't move. He just kept looking at me with those amber gold eyes. I went to the station intercom and I called the household's head of security. Her name was Commander Velsot, a Thyssen woman of about 45 who had the bearing of someone who had spent decades professionally assuming that every situation could go catastrophically wrong. She took everything seriously. I had never once seen her look surprised. She looked surprised when I told her. She was in my kitchen in 4 minutes with 2 of her team and a portable field analysis unit, a small device about the size of a shoe box that could run basic toxicological screening. They ran it over the sealed container of Velcara from the delivery batch without opening it. The device returned a result in 30 seconds. Commander Velsot read it. Then she read it again. Then she said something in rapid Thyssen to her team that I didn't catch. My Thyssen was functional, but she was talking fast and quiet, and I only got fragments. What I got was enough. The fragments included the Thyssen words for confirmed and significant concentration and malacrute extract. I didn't know what malacrute extract was at that moment. I found out very quickly. Chapter 7. Malacrute. Malacrute is a naturally occurring plant product from a moon in the outer systems of Thyssen space. It's been classified as a controlled substance under galactic compact regulations for about 60 years, specifically because of its history as a political poison. It has no therapeutic applications. It has no culinary applications. What it has is a very specific and terrible property. It is virtually undetectable by Thyssen sensory biology when processed to extract form, because it mimics the chemical signature of certain naturally occurring compounds that the Thyssen body considers benign. In other words, a Thyssen food taster would not catch it. Thyssen medical scanners, unless specifically calibrated to look for it, would not flag it. The concentration in the Velcara delivery batch was, I later learned, calculated to produce symptoms in approximately 2 hours that would look, initially, like a common digestive reaction to foreign food. By the time the actual toxicity presented, the source would be nearly impossible to identify from the food itself, because the compound degrades rapidly after ingestion. It would look like illness. It would look like an accident. The princess would survive probably at a lower dose, but the damage to her nervous system would have been severe, permanent in some functions. Or she would not survive. At the concentration in that batch, it was at the upper boundary. The people who prepared it had not been certain which way it would go. The Velcrath, however, had evolved specifically in response to exactly this kind of weaponized plant compound. Their olfactory biology is calibrated to detect malacrute among several other historically used assassination agents. That's why the Death-Hounds exist. That's why the royal household maintains them. For exactly this. And Moth, the youngest, still technically in training, had come to my kitchen and sat next to the sealed container and looked at me. Because he knew, and he trusted me to understand. Chapter 8. The compound goes into lockdown. What happens when you discover an assassination attempt in a royal household in the Thyssen sovereignty? It happens very fast and very quietly. Commander Velsot's team sealed the kitchen within 10 minutes. The contaminated batch was quarantined in a containment box, the kind that doesn't let anything in or out, not air, not signal, nothing. 2 of her officers went back through the supply chain documentation. The station went to internal security alert without announcing it publicly to the people in the market districts and the residential blocks. The morning continued as normal. There was no alarm, no announcement. The Thyssen court is very, very good at managing the space between something terrible almost happened and everyone remains calm. The princess was brought to a secure room on the upper residential level. 2 guards, both Thyssen, 6 feet tall, armed with the compact pulse weapons the sovereignty's household guard carries, posted outside. Then Commander Velsot brought me to a briefing room and asked me to walk through everything. When did the delivery arrive? Who had signed for it? What did I notice about the smell? What time exactly? What did I do with it? She had a recorder running. She asked clean, specific questions without emotion, and she listened to every answer completely before asking the next one. Halfway through my account, the princess arrived. I didn't know she was coming. I don't think Commander Velsot did either, because she stood up very fast and said something that translated roughly to Your Highness. The security protocol requests that you remain. And the princess said in English clearly and calmly, I know what the security protocol requests. Tell me what happened. She sat down across from me at the briefing table. She was still in her mourning clothes, the Thyssen equivalent of what I describe as a wrapped robe, white and deep blue, and she did not look frightened. She looked like someone who had just been informed that the world was slightly different than she thought it was, and was deciding how she felt about that. She looked at me. She said, You found it. I said, Yes. She said, In the Velkara I would have eaten. I said, Yes, I noticed the smell was off. I pulled the batch and kept it. She was quiet for a moment. In 3 years of knowing her, I had learned that her silences were not empty. She was processing. She was one of those people who thinks before they speak, really thinks, which in my experience is rarer than it should be. Then she said, You've eaten with me. I have shared food with you. In my culture, that means you are bound to my household by covenant. I think you may not have known that. I said I didn't know the formal part, but I knew the point of it. She said, Yes, I thought you did. Chapter 9. The Investigation OPNS. The supply chain trace took 6 hours. The Velkara delivery had originated from the station's primary supply depot, Bay 7, which handled food deliveries to the residential and governmental sectors. The depot served about 40 different household accounts. The contaminated batch had been flagged in the depot records as a standard order from the Royal Kitchen account, my account. But when the investigators pulled the original order file, the batch number didn't match anything I had ordered. The order had been inserted into the depot's logistics system approximately 18 hours before delivery. Someone had access to the station's logistics systems. That was a significant finding. The station systems were maintained by a compact standard technical administration team, a mix of Thyssen system operators and 3 humans from the Earth Technical Liaison Program. Getting into the logistics system was not something anyone could do casually. It required either elevated access credentials or a sophisticated intrusion that had bypassed the station's security monitoring. The security monitoring had flagged nothing, which meant one of 2 things. Either the intrusion was extraordinarily skilled, or it was done using legitimate credentials. Commander Velsot brought in the station's intelligence liaison, a Thyssen officer named Soval-Keth who dressed like an academic and had the eyes of someone who counted everything in every room he entered. Soval-Keth and his team began pulling access logs. Meanwhile, the princess asked me to cook dinner. Chapter 10. Dinner Under Guard. She asked through Commander Velsot, who related to me with an expression that suggested she found the request both logical and somewhat mystifying. The request was specific. The princess wanted dinner prepared, her regular dinner service. She wanted it in her rooms, not the main dining room. She wanted it to be whatever I was planning to make. Commander Velsot said, very carefully, the kitchen will remain under security observation during preparation. I said that was completely fine with me. I went back to my kitchen, which now had 2 security officers sitting in chairs against the far wall, and a field analysis unit on the counter that would be run over any dish before it left the room. The princess's regular dinner was a meal I could make in my sleep. a clear broth made from thyssen sea vegetables, a grain dish that was somewhere between a pilaf and a risotto using a small grain called vel rice that the princess particularly liked, and a dessert that I had developed myself over about 6 months of testing, a kind of custard made with thyssen cream and flavored with something called sava bark, which had a warm, slightly resinous flavor somewhere between cinnamon and cedar. I made all of it with every sense I had dialed to maximum. I checked every ingredient individually. I prepared the field analysis run myself on the finished dishes before the security officers even reached for the scanner, not because I didn't trust the process, but because I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to be the one who confirmed it was clean. It was clean, obviously it was clean, I had made it. The security officers scanned it anyway, also clean. I sent it up with the covered tray carrier and the duty server. An hour later, the server returned with the tray and a note in the princess's handwriting in English, because she knew I read English faster than thyssen. The note said, "The sava bark custard was particularly good tonight. I think you are angry and it helps." I stood in my kitchen laughing for about 30 seconds, alone, which is not something I do often. She was right. I was angry. Cooking while angry, when you control it, when you push the anger into precision rather than letting it become sloppiness, does something to a dish. There is a particular quality to food made with directed fury. It becomes more itself. The flavors are clearer. The textures are more deliberate. My grandmother called it cooking with your whole chest. I had absolutely cooked that custard with my whole chest. Chapter 11. What SOVALKTH found. The access log investigation took 2 more days. I'll compress what happened rather than walk through every hour of it, because the intelligence work was not my world. I provided testimony where requested. I kept the kitchen running. I fed the household staff and the security teams and the princess. The thyssen court runs on ceremony and routine, and maintaining the routine of meals was, Commander Velsot quietly explained to me, itself a security strategy. A disrupted routine signals disruption. A normal routine signals normalcy. The assassins, wherever they were, should believe that their attempt had not been discovered. What Sovalketh and his team found was careful and ugly. The logistics system intrusion had been performed using a legitimate credential set, one that belonged to a member of the station's technical administration team, a thyssen systems operator named Velron, who had been employed at Third Ring for 7 years and had an impeccable service record. Velron's credentials had been used, but the access log timestamps showed the intrusion occurring during a sleep cycle when Velron was documented as off-duty and at home. The credentials had been stolen, used without Velron's knowledge. The intrusion itself was traced, eventually, to a terminal in Bay 14 of the station's industrial section, a low-traffic maintenance area where the signal routed through several relay points before reaching the logistics system. The routing was sophisticated. It was the kind of routing that took professional knowledge and access to tools that were not casually available. Sovalketh brought his findings to Commander Velsot and the princess in a secured room. He had prepared a document briefing. He walked through the technical chain. Then he paused before the last section and said, in thyssen, something that the translation unit rendered as, the origin routing, fully traced, leads to a vessel currently docked at Station Dock Sigma 9. The vessel is registered to a trade consortium operating under a compact-recognized license. The consortium is nominally headquartered in the Outer Territories. The vessel arrived 6 days before the contaminated delivery and is scheduled to depart tomorrow. Tomorrow, the princess said, then we have tonight. Chapter 12. The Plan. I want to be clear that I was not in any sense part of the tactical plan. I am a cook. I know how to butcher a chicken and clarify a stock and properly temper chocolate and identify the moment a caramel is about to burn. I am not a security professional. I am not trained in counterespionage or tactical operations, or anything that you would find in the kind of file that Commander Velsot was reviewing in the briefing room. But I was in that briefing room. I was there because the princess wanted me there, and in the Thyssen royal household, what the princess wants takes some working around to override. Commander Velsot had looked at me when I walked in with an expression I had learned to read over 3 years as you are not supposed to be here, and yet here you are, and I do not have the time to argue about it right now. The plan was straightforward in concept and complicated in execution. The vessel at Dock Sigma 9 would not be permitted to leave. Station Dock Control, under Sovolketh's coordination, would issue a routine technical hold standard procedure citing a minor docking regulation violation. The crew of the vessel would be contacted. They would be told this was routine, standard. Meanwhile, Thyssen security officers would be positioned at all departure points from the docking ring. And here is where it gets complicated. The vessel had not come alone. Tracking of the docking bay's monitoring showed that 4 individuals had departed the vessel at various times over the preceding 6 days and moved through the station on what appeared to be routine commercial business. At least 2 of those individuals had, at some point, passed through the supply district near Bay 7. They were still on the station. Sovolketh did not know exactly where. He had descriptions from the docking cameras. He had movement traces that were partial. The individuals had been careful about avoiding certain monitoring zones. He had a general probability model suggesting they were currently in one of 3 district sectors. Commander Velsot said, "We cannot move against the vessel until we have located and secured the individuals. If we move against the vessel first, the individuals will be alerted and we lose them." Sovolketh said, "If we move against the individuals first and fail to contain them, they alert the vessel and we lose the vessel." There was a silence. The princess said, "We need to draw the individuals to a location we control." Another silence. Commander Velsot said, "Your Highness, I would prefer a solution that does not involve." The princess said, "Me." Chapter 13, The Bait. I want to be very honest about how I felt about this plan. I hated it. The plan was, and I recognize its tactical logic. I understand why it was the best available option. I am not arguing that. The plan was for the princess to make a public appearance in a controlled location that the assassins might take as an opportunity to make another attempt. Not a real opportunity. A staged one. A location where the security team would be positioned, where the exits would be covered, where every variable was as controlled as the planners could make it. The princess was calm about it, completely calm. I was not calm about it. I said to her, I said this quietly, not in the briefing, but when she walked past me in the corridor outside the briefing room, and I fell in beside her because 3 years of proximity gives you certain conversational permissions, I said, "I don't like this." She said, "I know." I said, "You are 19 years old." She said, "I am the 3rd daughter of the sovereign. I have been training for situations of this nature since I was old enough to understand what my position means. You know this about me, Marin." I did know it, it didn't help. She said, "You caught the poison. I am trusting you to not let them near me again." I said, "I'm a cook, I can't." She said, "You know everything that comes into this household. You know the smell of something wrong. That is not nothing. That is considerable." A pause. "Also the Velkrath trust you. That is not nothing either." I thought about Moth sitting next to the sealed container and looking at me with those amber gold eyes. I said, "Fine, what do you need?" Chapter 14, The Day of. The public appearance was scheduled for the late afternoon of the following station day, in the Apex Garden, the formal courtyard at the top of the royal compound, open to the sky dome that simulated a slightly alien version of daylight, blue, white, and bright. The princess would attend what was announced as a brief cultural exchange reception. These happened regularly, were minimally attended, and were the kind of low-key public event that would plausibly be attended by someone involved in a trade consortium looking for an opportunity. I had a specific role in this, which Velsot had accepted with visible reluctance and which I will describe in a moment. The morning of the appearance, I was in my kitchen at 400. Routine, same as always. The security officers were there. They'd been there for 3 days now, and I'd started making them tea. At about 4:30, Brand came into the kitchen. He walked in from the residential corridor with the dignified, purposeful movement he always had, as though he owned every room he entered. He sat down near my prep station, and he watched me work. At 500, Vale came. She sat in her usual way near the door, positioned to see both entrances, missing nothing. At 5:20, Moth arrived. He went immediately to the spot near the prep station where he could see my hands, and he settled there, and his eyes tracked everything I did. All 3 Death-Hounds, in my kitchen. At 5 in the morning on the day something was going to happen. I didn't say anything to them. I just kept working. The tea was ready. I set cups for the security officers, and I kept working, and I thought, all right, if the 3 of you are here, I'm not as alone as I thought. Chapter 15, The Reception. The Apex Garden in the late afternoon was exactly the kind of setting that made you briefly forget that you were in a rotating metal habitat, orbiting a planet in a solar system 90 light-years from Earth. The Sky Dome was doing its blue-white ambient simulation. The garden itself had that particular quality of this informal spaces, very precise, very intentional, every plant placed exactly where it needed to be, paths of pale stone between sections of the blue-gray grass, the glass willow trees casting their strange crystalline shadows. There were about 30 people present, household staff, diplomatic guests, a small clutch of trade representatives including 2 humans from the Earth Liaison Office. And somewhere, Sovolketh had told us, 2 of the 4 individuals from the vessel at Dock Sigma 9 were in or approaching the garden district. The princess moved through the reception with the grace she always had in formal settings. I watched from the service corridor. I had a reason to be there, a legitimate service presence, trays of the refreshments I'd prepared, and I watched the room with everything I had. The Velcrath were with her, Brand on her left, Vale at her right shoulder, Moth behind and slightly off to one side. This was the formation they always maintained in public settings. To most of the guests, they were simply large, well-behaved animals accompanying the princess as a matter of custom, nothing unusual. I was watching a man near the Glasswillow Grove on the east side of the garden. He was presenting as a trade liaison. I had a description from the docking cameras, approximate height and build, and this man matched well enough. He was moving through the garden on a path that would take him toward the refreshments table, which would take him past the princess. He was watching her. Not the way people watch someone they find interesting at a reception, a different kind of watching, still, assessing. I moved. Chapter 16, What I Did. I want to be clear. I did not do anything tactical. I did not disable anyone. I am not that person. What I did was, I walked from the service corridor toward the refreshments table on a path that would intersect with the man's. I was carrying a tray of small prepared portions, thyssen finger foods, the kind of thing you serve at a reception. I was moving with the purposeful, slightly distracted energy of someone doing their job, which is not hard to fake because it was also exactly what I was doing. I got close enough to him, maybe 4 feet, and I smelled something. Not malacrute, something different, something bitter and sharp under the station's ambient air recycling, so faint that you'd need to be very close to catch it. The kind of thing you might have on your hands if you had been handling a concentrate recently and hadn't quite washed it all off. I turned toward him and offered the tray. He looked at me. He had that particular flatness behind the eyes that people get when they're performing a social role while their attention is elsewhere. He looked at the tray. He was about to dismiss me with the casual non-acknowledgement that people at receptions use on service staff. And then Moth was there. Moth had come from behind the princess, crossing the garden at a trot, and he walked directly up to the man and sat down in front of him. Perfectly still, looking at the princess. Not aggressive, not growling, just there, pointed like a compass needle. The man's face changed. In a fraction of a second, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, something in his carefully managed expression came apart. Just slightly, just enough. Commander Velsot's team was there in 4 seconds. Chapter 17, the second one. The second individual was outside the garden entirely. He was in the service corridor, my service corridor, the one I'd come from, the one that connected the garden to the household service wing and ultimately to the kitchen. He'd been waiting. For me. Or rather, he'd been waiting for whoever was going to walk back through that corridor. Because if the first individual's presence in the garden was a distraction or a secondary attempt, the real play might be to get someone into the service wing during the confusion, to the kitchen, to whatever was being prepared. I know this because I found him there when I went back through, after Commander Velsot's team moved on the first individual. He was a shorter man than I expected, dressed in the utility clothing that station maintenance workers wore. He was standing next to the junction where the service corridor split toward the kitchen wing, and he had a small case in his right hand, and he had not yet opened the kitchen door, but he was facing it. He heard me come through the corridor, and he turned. We looked at each other. I said, "That door is locked." It wasn't locked, but he didn't know that. He said something in a language I didn't recognize. Not Thyssen, something else. His eyes were moving past me, assessing, calculating, and I could see him deciding something. I said, "The Velcrath are in the kitchen." That was a lie. They were in the garden, but they'd been in my kitchen for 3 mornings running, and I thought maybe there was a chance he'd heard something about the princess's animals and their capabilities. There was a chance. He hesitated. Vale came through the corridor door behind me. I do not know how she knew. I do not understand the Velcrath well enough to know if she heard something or sensed something or simply followed at a distance because her instincts told her to. But she came through the door from the garden, moving with that low, powerful lope, and she went right past me and sat down 18 inches from the man with the case. Completely still. Looking past him at nothing. He put the case down slowly, and he put his hands where they were visible, and he stayed very still because every instinct he had, I think, told him that was the correct response to whatever Vale was communicating. Velsot's second team came through the far end of the corridor 45 seconds later. Chapter 18, the kitchen door. After everything settled, after the 2 individuals were in security custody, after the vessel at Dock Sigma 9 was secured, and the other 2 members of the team on the vessel were detained, after the case from the service corridor was opened by Velsot's team in full protective protocols and found to contain, predictably, another form of concentrated compound. After all of that, I went back to my kitchen. I went to my kitchen and I stood in the middle of it, and I looked at my prep stations and my burners and my refrigeration units and my bread knives and my copper-bottomed saucepans that I'd brought from Earth in my personal luggage allocation, because I refused to work without them. I stood there for about 5 minutes, just stood. Then I put the kettle on. Then I sat down on the prep stool I kept near the back counter, and I let my hands shake a little, which they'd been wanting to do for about 6 hours. Moth came in from wherever he'd been and sat next to me. He didn't do the fixed stillness that meant danger. He just sat, like a dog sits next to you when something is wrong, and he looked at me with those gold amber eyes, and he was just there. Present, weight and warmth and breath. I said, "Yeah, okay, we're fine." He put his head on my knee. I sat in my kitchen with a Death-Hound's head on my knee, and the kettle coming to boil, and I thought, my grandmother would have found all of this very interesting. Chapter 19. Aftermath. The formal investigation took 3 weeks. The Trade Consortium's vessel was found to be operating as a front for a political faction within the Outer Territories, one of the border sovereignty disputes that had been simmering in that part of compact space for about a decade. The princess, as the sovereign's daughter with a specific diplomatic focus on those territories, had been a target not for personal reasons but for political ones. The faction believed that removing her from the equation during her formative diplomatic training would shift the sovereign's approach to the border negotiations. It was calculated. It was not personal. That somehow made it worse, I thought. That a 19-year-old's death would have been a political calculation, a line item in someone's strategy. The 4 individuals were remanded to compact judicial authority. The faction was formally censured under compact law. The border negotiations were adjusted, not in the direction the faction had wanted. The station's logistics system was audited and rebuilt with additional security architecture. Velron, the system's operator whose credentials had been stolen, was cleared completely and received a formal apology from the household administration, which I understand in Thyssen court culture is a meaningful acknowledgement. I received a formal commendation from the sovereign's household, transmitted via secure diplomatic channel to Third Ring Station, and delivered to me by Commander Velsot, who handed me the document with her usual serious expression and said, in careful English, because she was making the effort, "Well done." Which from her, I later learned from one of the liaison officers, was equivalent to a standing ovation. Chapter 20. What the Princess Said. 3 days after the event, when the immediate security intensity had settled, and things were beginning to approach something like normal, the princess came to my kitchen. Not for a meal, not at a service time. In the middle of the afternoon she just came. She knocked, she always knocked, which was more courtesy than most people in that compound extended to the service wing, and she came in and sat on the prep stool near the back counter, which was Moth's preferred stool, and he accepted the displacement with obvious reluctance. She said, "I want to know something." I said, "All right." She said, "When you found the Velcara, you kept it, you didn't throw it away. Why?" I thought about it, I said, because if I threw it away, nobody would know what had been done, and I felt like somebody needed to know. She was quiet for a moment. She said, "On my world there is a concept. In our language it is Velkarathsova. It does not translate precisely. The closest approximation is something like, the person who notices what others pass by." She paused. "We consider this a rare capacity. We believe it cannot be trained. You either have it or you do not." I said, "I think I just have a good nose." She said, "Yes, but you trusted your nose. That is the part that cannot be trained." I didn't know what to say to that. I'm not good at receiving certain kinds of statements, the kind that are true and generous and that see you clearly. I tend to deflect. She said, "In Thyssen tradition, when someone has preserved the life of a household member by Velkarathsova, by noticing what others missed, they are made part of the household's name record. It is formal. It is permanent. It means that the household recognizes them as bound." I said, "I thought I was already covenant bound because we ate together." She said, "That was informal. This is the formal version." And she looked at me with those large, slightly reflective eyes that I'd spent 3 years learning to read. "If you choose to accept it, the choice is yours." I said, "What does it mean practically?" She said, "It means that when I am sovereign, which is not soon, there are 2 sisters ahead of me, but eventually, the cook from Kansas will have a seat at the table. In the formal record, it means my household will be obligated to you and your descendants by name." I stood in my kitchen for a moment. I said, "My grandmother is going to be so confused by this." The princess made the sound that I had learned over 3 years was her version of a laugh, a low, resonant exhale, almost a hum. She used it sparingly. It was one of my favorite sounds in that compound. She said, "Will you accept?" I said yes, obviously yes. She said, "Good. Now make me the Savabark custard again. I have thought about it for 3 days." Chapter 21. What I Know Now. I am writing this. And yes, I know, the fact that a cook is writing a formal testimony account is unusual. But the Thyssen record-keeping tradition requires a personal account from every household member who was present at a significant event. And I was present. So here we are. I am writing this 2 years after cycle 740. I am still at Third Ring Station. Still in my kitchen. Still making modified earth cuisine for the princess and the household. Still arguing with the supply depot about delivery quality standards. Still keeping emergency backup stock of everything because experience teaches you things. Moth is still in my kitchen most mornings. Brand and Vale come when they feel like it, which is not every day, which suits their dignity. Moth is not particularly concerned with dignity. He is concerned with where I am, and I find this, honestly, comforting. The Velcrath handlers told me something, about a month after the event. They said that the Death-Hounds choose who they track. They're bonded to the royal family, obviously, that's their primary function. But they're also individually selective about which household members they extend secondary alert trust to. Most people in a household, the Velcrath simply ignore, not hostilely, just professionally. They're doing a job. The handler said, Moth had been tracking my kitchen for about 8 months before cycle 740, following me between the kitchen and the garden corridor on days when I moved between them, sitting near the kitchen door when I was inside. Not every day, but regularly. I didn't know this. I thought he just liked the scraps. The handler said, he may have liked the scraps, but the Velcrath don't follow people for food. They follow people they assess as relevant to the safety of the household. I sat with that for a long time. A Death-Hound that could detect assassination-grade poisons at parts per billion concentrations had decided, 8 months before anyone tried to poison the princess, that I was relevant to the household's safety, that I was worth following, worth tracking. I don't know what he sensed in me. My grandmother's cooking, maybe. The particular way that someone who loves their work and loves the people they're feeding occupies a kitchen. Something in the biochemistry of genuine care, people who study this sort of thing, have suggested that animals are extraordinarily sensitive to authentic emotional states, and Velcrath more than most animals, for obvious evolutionary reasons. Whatever it was, he saw it. He came to my kitchen, and on the morning when it mattered, he sat down next to the thing that was wrong and looked at me until I understood. Chapter 22. Brand and Vale and Moth. I want to say one more thing about the Velcrath, because I don't think they get enough credit in the official account. The official account, the security report, the judicial documentation, the compact investigation summary, frames what happened as contamination detected by cook, security response initiated, suspects apprehended. That is accurate as far as it goes. But it does not include the part where a Death-Hound walked across a formal diplomatic reception in a perfectly maintained formal garden and sat down in front of an assassin and looked at the princess. It does not include Vale coming through the corridor door at precisely the right moment. It does not include 3 months of Moth deciding I was worth trusting before any of this happened. The Velcrath are documented extensively in Thyssen historical records and in compact xenobiological studies. But in my experience, in the experience of someone who has spent years in a kitchen with them nearby, and who has had, now, one very significant moment with them, the documents miss something. They are not tools. They are not detection equipment. They are not, in any simple sense, pets. They are partners, thinking partners, feeling partners, in whatever way their biology allows. They decided to trust me, Not because I fed them. Vale ate less from my kitchen than the others and she came anyway. Not because of protocol. There is no protocol that sends a Velcrath to watch a cook. Because of something they assessed in me and decided was worth their attention. I do not take that lightly. I do not think I ever will. Epilogue, the kitchen at the end of the universe. There's something people don't understand about being a cook in space. The thing they don't understand is this: it's the same as being a cook on Earth, the same fundamental transaction. You take the raw things, the ingredients, the labor, the attention, the knowledge, and you transform them into something that another person can take into their body and be sustained by. Not just physically. The sustenance that matters most is the other kind, the I thought about you kind, the I knew what you needed kind. In my kitchen 90 light years from Kansas, with the gravity stabilizers humming and the refrigeration units smelling like recycled starlight, I made that transaction every day with an alien princess who asked me about dogs and weather and why humans decorated their food. And somewhere in that daily transaction, something built itself that I did not have a name for until she gave me one. Velkarath Sova, the one who notices what others pass by. I trust my nose, that's it really, that's the whole of it. I trust what my hands and my nose and 20 years of training and my grandmother's kitchen tell me when they say that something is wrong, or something is right, or something needs more salt, or something in this delivery batch smells about 4% off and needs to be kept. That's the whole thing, that's all I did. A Death-Hound with gold amber eyes decided 8 months in advance that that was enough. That trusting your instincts about what's right and wrong, in food or in anything, is the quality worth following. I think my grandmother would have liked Moth. I think he would have sat in her kitchen, too.